Thank you to City of London and the Green Finance Institute for inviting me to speak today at this event on voluntary carbon markets as part of the Green Horizon Summit. There is an urgent need to increase all types of financial flows to decarbonise economies, strengthen resilience and adapt to climate change. Carbon markets are an important tool, among others, for helping to deliver this finance and addressing the global need for emissions reductions. If they are done right, not only can they help us meet our Paris goals, but many projects can also generate broader environmental, social and economic co-benefits, ranging from increased biodiversity, job creation, support for Indigenous peoples and local communities, and health benefits. And as the market develops, it's emerging markets and developing economies who stand to gain the most. But in order to make sure we deliver on these objectives, these markets must be of high quality to ensure that they succeed in serving the planet. And in order to do that, we need common standards and guidelines to shape the market. Firstly, companies need guidance on when they can use carbon credits. Let me be clear, carbon credits cannot and should not be a reason to avoid reducing absolute emissions. The entire economy needs to decarbonise rapidly to keep us on track to keep global temperature rises below 1.5 degrees. But for those companies that are doing the right thing, they will need certainty on when and how they can use their carbon credits as part of their transition. And secondly, on the carbon credits themselves, the market is built on the confidence that what you think you are buying is what you are buying. If there isn't integrity in the market, then the market will fail. On Wednesday, at Finance Day, there was a great discussion on how high integrity on both the supply and demand side of voluntary carbon markets can accelerate climate ambition alongside inclusive, sustainable development, bringing together the initiatives looking to address these issues. And as this market develops, UK financial services, with their history for innovation, will bring important expertise to support leading in this development. The UK has all the components needed for a high-integrity carbon market, including strong governance frameworks, agile regulation, sophisticated market infrastructure, and the capacity to scale much-needed investment. And following the establishment of the UK VCM Forum, I'm excited to announce two more important developments today here in UK that I believe can help to turn this vision into reality. Firstly, the Intercontinental Exchange plans to, for the first time, offer carbon credit futures contracts for the voluntary market, which will be listed and cleared in London. This will join the 14 gigatons, or 14 billion metric tons, which are already cleared annually by ICE in the UK. This is the first time an exchange of its size in the UK has taken forward such action in this area. And secondly, in order to help direct finance towards high integrity projects and support the voluntary carbon market, the London Stock Exchange Group is developing a new market solution that will accelerate the deployment of capital at scale towards climate mitigation projects across the globe, thus supporting a just transition to a low-carbon economy. These two innovations today demonstrate how the UK is charging ahead to help develop these global markets that can help us accelerate climate action. And with that, I'll hand back to Dame Clara Furse, who with the London Stock Exchange and the Intercontinental Exchange will talk through these exciting new developments in more detail.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here as part of the Green Horizon Summit at what feels like an inflection point in the fight against climate change, with serious momentum building across business, a sense of real purpose, urgency and intent. Business leaders are attending this COP in unprecedented numbers. As the Chancellor just said so eloquently, we are here today to discuss some exciting and important developments in voluntary carbon markets. I'm here as the chair of the UK Voluntary Carbon Markets Forum, a group established in April to determine how we use the remarkable pool of resources in London, its unique international ecosystem, to operationalise a high-integrity market for quality carbon credits. More information about us and our ambition for this market is available today as we publish the future of voluntary carbon markets. The truth is that the total cost of transitioning the world economy to net zero is estimated at $5 trillion per year for the next 30 years. But that capital needs to be put to work now. This is an immense challenge, which can only succeed through partnership between government and business at a global level, joining private trillions to public billions to secure a safe and prosperous future for our planet. Or as the Chancellor put it, a just transition. Action now. And this morning, we are in the fortunate position to discuss the actions being taken by two of the world's most global exchanges, whose commitment to this vital market will help to catalyse the investment required to deliver on the promises being made at this conference. Let me now introduce Julia Hoggett, Chief Executive of London Stock Exchange plc, and Gordon Bennett, Managing Director of Utility Markets at ICE. So, let's have a conversation. Gordon, and then Julia. What, in your view, is the biggest challenge to successful scale-up of these markets? How do we enroll all stakeholders to crowd in those trillions and put them to work in an equitable and productive way? And why is this topic so hot and controversial?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, you know, when I was a wee boy growing up in Blairgowrie, my dream was to play football at Hampden in Scotland, and sadly that didn't happen. But I'm here today to talk about one of my great passions of environmental markets. So it's a real treat. In terms of what the challenge is, the main challenge is the complexity. If I think about net zero, there's really two strands to it. It's energy transition, but it's also creating a new asset class for natural capital. And energy transition is complicated. I advise anyone to read a good Václav Smil book to just understand the complexity of energy value change. But you know, making a new asset class clearly has challenges. But the good news is the solutions are here already. ICE has been operating environmental markets for a decade now, and the purpose of those environmental markets is to value positive and negative externalities. So the tools are here, they work. But I think one important point is that the storytelling has got to be right, the narrative has got to be right, and a couple of specific points in terms of the carbon credit markets are, I know we call them voluntary, and I know why we call them voluntary, but really I had a conversation about 2 years ago with a friend of mine in the market, and I said, is voluntary market a bit of an oxymoron? Because if the price gets too high, do we stop buying them? And he goes, well, it's not voluntary, Gordon. You know, when companies are making commitments, they're going to be upheld to those commitments by their stakeholders. So you're complying with your commitments as opposed to be operating in a compliance market. So I think that's really important. And also the use of offset, I find that they're not offsets for me. We're not offsetting. We're providing an instrument to value the positive externality. So a renewable energy certificate is valuing the positive externality of green electricity. A carbon credit is valuing the positive externality of nature to capture and store carbon. And that's how you're going to sort of create an asset class. And so, you know, but finally on the storytelling, you know, I'm reading Billy Connolly's autobiography, Windswept and Interesting, and he's a famous son of Glasgow, but he's a wonderful storyteller. And I think it's important that we get the story right, we get the narrative right, not just for the specifics, but the more holistic purpose of financial markets. And I think we can tell that through a sustainable finance lens, and we can get more stakeholders to sort of see the purpose of these markets.
Thank you, Gordon. Julia?
Well, I'd agree with what Gordon said, particularly around the use of voluntary, because I think in the context of the announcements that have been made this week regarding transition plans and the need to publish those, then companies will be held to account to those, and therefore their utilisation of these credits will also be something that will be absolutely visible and transparent. For me, on the storytelling piece, we need to come back to what, in my mind, is what these markets are all about. And to me, the voluntary carbon market is about reducing the sum total of carbon in the atmosphere. And that is the drive and that is the purpose, and we have to remind ourselves of that. But we do have a lot of the solutions there, and occasionally we need to focus on elements of them that have been the blockers. One of the challenges is what I've described as the chicken and egg problem, which is that voluntary carbon projects need to be genuinely additive. In other words, they wouldn't happen economically otherwise, and they can only happen because effectively you're valuing the very externality that Gordon's talking about. But in order to have the confidence to put those projects in place, you need to have the confidence to be able to value the credits, and if you don't have the credits, you don't have the projects. And so how do you start and where do you start? And I think making sure that we can address all elements of that chain is absolutely critical in getting to the point where we can grow this market at pace to achieve the very thing we want to do, which is make sure we're actively using market mechanisms to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about the London Stock Exchange initiative?
Yep.
And how that supports financial flows, will support financial flows to climate mitigation projects?
Absolutely, I'd love to. It's a passion project of mine, so my risk is I talk about it for too long. So I've always said that the London Stock Exchange has a centuries-old role as a venue that brings together those who need capital with those who have capital in service of an objective. The urgent challenge that capital markets have financed over the last year are dwarfed by the generational challenge of the just transition to net zero. And the maintenance of the biodiversity that supports our planet. And as part of our actions to drive climate change, to address climate change, the London Stock Exchange is announcing today that we're developing a new capital market solution to enhance investment in carbon mitigation projects worldwide. This will enable funds to be listed that will provide capital for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and remove carbon from our atmosphere. The London Stock Exchange expects to use its existing market infrastructure, supplemented by specific requirements relevant to carbon credit projects. And our intention is to facilitate the public listing of carbon funds through a disciplined and transparent market with a clear price signal and confidence that investors can directly support the development of high-quality climate change mitigation projects worldwide. We anticipate that corporates and other organisations with long-term need for carbon credits will become investors, but others will as well. Using the credits delivered by these vehicles, which need to be issued as an alternative or additional dividend to meet a portion of their needs. We envisage a thriving market that delivers a range of investment alternatives from different types of carbon reduction and removal activities to specific regions of focus. And I think this is a really important part of this. This is also about providing financing and driving investment into the global south, where we anticipate a very significant portion of these transactions will take place. And it's envisaged that the process of generating carbon credits will use the existing ecosystem of credible standards, a lot of which we've heard about already today, and verification bodies, and be strengthened by the very efforts of the Task Force on the Scaling of Voluntary Carbon Markets, and other governance initiatives supported by industry experts and civil society groups. And I think that piece is really important. So frameworks such as the core carbon principles develop, we'll build upon best practice today, and filling vital gaps that are currently inhibiting climate action at scale. And we want to make sure that we're retaining the vigour and the transparency that public markets can bring, but also operating in an open and collaborative system. And our open access philosophy will very much be at the heart of what we're seeking to do.
Thank you very much, Julia. And Gordon, your initiative, this carbon credit contract, can you talk a bit about what that means and how that might interact with the London Stock Exchange initiative to drive transparency and liquidity and scaling?
Sure. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're launching a nature-based solution futures contract. So we're expressing the value of the positive externality through a commodity, effectively. And I guess the London Stock Exchange Group is showing that through the value of a security. And there, there's lots of ways to value externalities, and they're complementary. And as you're saying, Julia, that paying dividends and carbon credits, these are carbon credits, these futures contracts. But it's also important to think about. I'm going to use another Bill Gates. This time in his book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, he tells a great story about how we utilize energy, how we plug in, how we make stuff, how we keep ourselves warm and cool, and how we feed ourselves. But he also introduces something called the green premium, which is effectively saying that greener technologies are newer, they tend to be more expensive. And so how do we erode the green premium to incentivize investment in greener technologies? And our environmental markets, valuing positive and negative externalities, erode the green premium. The best example of that in practice is actually here in the UK, in the electricity generation sector. And so in the compliance markets, where we value the negative externality of pollution, it's because the UK's had robust carbon pricing for over a decade that there's no coal in the electricity generation merit order anymore. So that's entirely the objective of the policy. You abate your emissions. It probably, there's about 30 to 40% worth of emissions have come out of the UK electricity system because of applying carbonomics. If we were still applying an economic model, it's cheaper to burn coal. And so that price of negative externality has meant that coal is out of the merit order. And so that's got rid of that green premium. And the other way of narrowing the green premium is to make the positive externality have value, so you make the greener technology more valuable as opposed to making the dirtier technology less valuable. And that's what the nature-based future is about. It's about attributing a value to the positive externality of capturing and storing carbon. Now, because nature, we were talking about complexity, nature is complex, particularly around the monitoring, reporting, and verification of nature. So the other important announcement we were making today is the formation of the Carbon Oversight Committee, which will sit in ICE benchmark administration. And so, to bring that higher level of integrity to this market, we think it's necessary to adopt this governance committee, and part of the role of the committee will to make sure we're steering through the guardrails of all the great work that's been done by the Task Force for Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, the VCMI, and clearly the City of London Voluntary Carbon Forum as well. So we think that's an important ingredient to the offering.
Can you also say something about the interaction between the markets that you're developing on ICE? You've spoken, or you've touched on the relationship between that and the mandatory compliance element, but you might want to expand on that. But also the over-the-counter markets, because obviously there are markets for voluntary carbon credits at the moment, and they tend to be over-the-counter, auction-led.
Yeah.
How do you see all of this working together in a cohesive, productive way that actually drives liquidity?
Yeah, I think it's no different to existing markets or securities or commodities. That the over-the-counter market exists in tandem, is complementary to the exchange-traded market. I suppose what I'd say about the exchange-traded market, certainly from a commodity perspective, it breaks down sort of barriers to entry. It's got that one-to-many model where you have your clearing relationship and you've got access to all of the customers. So it reduces a barrier to entry. And the other key aspect of exchange markets is transparency. People can see the price. Now, people will still go OTC if they've got, these are benchmark contracts, if people have got specific demands, they want a particular project or they want sustainable development goals in there as well, then I imagine people are still going to use bespoke bilateral transaction techniques. But if you have the benchmark price to see, then it sort of lets everyone know what the value of these attributes are.
And Julia, can I ask you a similar question, which is how you see the relationship between the new London Stock Exchange initiative and the futures markets, essentially, that ICE are developing?
Well, I'd see two concrete ones. One is in a sort of formation of the ecosystem, and the other is in a natural trading perspective. So one of the benefits, I think, of bringing these things onto venues is we can use the existing disciplines of transparency and disclosure. And the funds will need to meet all the standards that we already have, so that will increase the amount of information about the nature of activity that's going on in the market and allow it to be scrutinised and create disciplines around that. And I think naturally also create increasing senses of segmentation and different project types within that as a consequence, which I think is valuable for the creation of any large scalable market. And I think it also, from a credibility of the market point of view, is incredibly valuable, because one of the things that has happened is, yes, we've had OTC markets without necessarily a great deal of detail and information about what's going on underneath the bonnet, as it were. And we do need to create a market where companies can make transition plans, commit to those transition plans, disclose those transition plans, and then we have a similar level of transparency in terms of the actual projects which are being invested in. I hope that also aids confidence. And it means that when people have confidence about the contracts that they're trading on for a commodity exchange, then they know that it's all part of that same ecosystem. So there's something very valuable about that.
Yeah.
The second piece, though, is that what we would envisage in this structure is that investors in these funds will maybe in specie receive a dividend that is a voluntary carbon credit. Now, if they have a need to apply that credit, then they can cancel it, retire it, and then they can have utilised it. But alternatively, they could sell it. And they could sell it into either over the counter or into a venue as well.
Yeah.
So that creates, again, start feeding the ecosystem so that there is a sort of complementarity of development of the architecture.
Yeah.
So I see them as fitting well together.
So that's such an important point, isn't it, that can't be overstated. The fact that what exchanges tend to do is bring that element of definition, scrutiny, discipline, confidence, clarity, and all of that aids growth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to. I've been in financial services for 30 years, but I didn't really. When I was asking my question, what sustainable finance is, I found myself finding it difficult to say what finance was, and then I sort of went, okay, what is finance? And finance is about allocating capital and managing risk, and those are really important. Being able to smooth earnings for corporates gives them access to more forms of capital and cheaper forms of capital, which drives the real economy. But having been in financial services for 30 years, I only started to appreciate that and gather that sense of purpose when I was thinking about sustainable finance. So I think there's a great opportunity to tell a positive story about financial markets through the lens of sustainable finance, which will be, people from a wider stakeholder group might see it in a more positive light, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I've always put it that we need a financial ecosystem that serves our natural ecosystem, and I think that's exactly what we're seeking to achieve by this project.
Finance is about achieving an end. It is essentially about service. Yep. So important to stress that as well. Very quickly, because we haven't got much time left, I wanted to ask you both, if we look back a year from now, what would you say the most important factor for success will have been? And if you judge a year from now where you've got to, how would you define that success?
Want to start?
Sure. What will success look like in a year's time? Well, clearly, people utilising these products will be a key determinant of success. But I think what if we're being successful, we'll have lots more products in our portfolio that are valuing externalities that are complementing our existing portfolio. So there'll be more products out there helping people value positive and negative externalities.
Yeah. So those really important co-benefits. Yeah. That need recognition, definition, and they need people to pay for them. So this is also about driving up the price, isn't it?
Yeah. And look, I would say, look, if we are seeing a steady stream of financing into projects that ultimately reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then that will be an incredible tick in the box. But it also needs to be about recognising that this needs to be a sophisticated, complex market that will evolve as we learn as a planet how to resolve these challenges. And actually this market will have to evolve as we develop. And that, I think, will be a sign of its success, not its failure in that regard.
Excellent point, and an important point on which to end. Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much, Gordon, for joining us this morning. and for explaining these really important initiatives. Thank you.
Pleasure.